decided when we were
Okay, we're going to get started. So normally Matt Nearing introduces these Porter Lunchtime Talks, but Steve Aldrich and I, Jared Beaton from Earth Sciences, we get the honor of introducing today because we were the leaders for the Porter Scholars trip last summer. And the trip was Mammoths and the Mathematics of Climate Change. So the students are going to tell you all about that trip. I want to remind you that there's another talk. The next lunchtime talk in Science and Mathematics is Dr. Christy Duran of the Biology program, Thursday, October 18th, talking about plants in space. So Steve Aldrich is going to tell us a little bit about the Porter Scholars program.
So first off, this is going to be kind of a circus up here. We're going to have a lot of people coming in and going out. So what I'd like to do is save all applause and questions until the end of the presentation, and hopefully we'll know when that is. The Porter Scholars program itself is funded by a grant from William Porter, who graduated from Adams State College then with a bachelor's degree in mathematics. He went on to found the first electronic trading platform for the stock exchange, that was E-Trade, and then donated generously quite a bit of funding to Adams State for various things. One of them was the Porter Scholars program, and a few words about that. This is the application pamphlet that students who are interested in applying for the Porter program just pick one of these up in the main office. We actually brought some to this presentation, so if you want one, you can just grab one on the way out. The application itself, there's a little piece to it right here that just says your name and some information about it, but you definitely need to have your application in by the 1st of March, which is next semester. There is no late submission of applications. The decision is made shortly thereafter, and usually by the beginning of April, the students know that they're Porter Scholars or not, and if they are Porter Scholars, then they can choose whether or not they want to go on this trip that we're going to be telling you about this noon. You do have to be a declared either science or mathematics major. That can be in geography, geology, biology, any of the sciences or mathematics. And you need to have a relatively high GPA and or the high school composite index score. Is it a 3.0 minimum? And it is competitive. So just because you have a high GPA doesn't mean you're going to get it. You also need to write a letter, and that's a competitive letter. You need to present yourself well. But assuming that you have some unmet financial need, and a high GPA, and you receive the scholarship and become a Porter Scholar, then there are several things that come along with that. One of them is an actual academic scholarship that could cover tuition and fees for that unmet need, but also the opportunity to apply for and join in on these focused academic programs. There are a whole variety of things that could fit into that category. The Porter Scholars trip is only one of those things. For example, there was a trip to Africa with Dr. Armstrong, where some Porter Scholars went on that trip. I don't know if the program paid for everything, but I know it paid for part of their trip. But the Porter Scholars trip itself is always the first week after the spring semester. We typically have 2 faculty members in science and math that lead the trip, and they're in charge of deciding what the trip's going to be about, where you're going to go, and what you're going to learn. Dr. Beaton and myself decided that math and climate change would be interesting, and that we could do some geology and bring some biology into it with our biology students as well. The trip is wonderful for the students because they get 2 credits, and they don't have to pay a dime. So if you're interested, grab one of those pamphlets on your way out. This noon we will have 6 student presenters. They are in order: Drake Cisneros, Darren Cisneros, Vance Barksdale, Tavia Carlson, and Nicole Engler. And Jacob Smith and Jason Roth were originally not going to be here this noon, so they helped with the presentation, and we will thank everybody at the end. So I will stop talking and introduce Drake Cisneros.
All right, thank you for the introduction, Dr. Alexander. So our first site that we had stopped at is the Villa Grove Mammoth site.
And Villa Grove, for those of you who don't know, is about 40 miles, located 40 miles north of here on Highway 17. And it's just kind of close to Moffett area, and between Moffett and there's a little town, Villa Grove there. And this site is actually an old rock quarry construction site that was halted because of this archaeological find that they found here. And they had found a mammoth bone. And the way it was found was a construction worker was about 40 feet deep in the ground, and he was working with his loader, and he noticed there was like this abnormal presence in the ground, and obviously it was just like this larger bone. And what it was a large vertebrate from this mammoth. So the construction worker got a hold of the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. The curator, Dr. Steve Holland, got a group of students from Adams State, teen scholars, and also led excavation with Dr. Jared Beaton to kind of dig around at this site to see if you can find more evidence of a mammoth or any other archaeological finds. And this land here was ideal for mining the road base, because you can mine out about 15 millimeter aggregate, or just like kind of like little gravel pieces. That's just perfect for road base. And this maintained and protected by the Bureau of Land Management. And we had a guy talk to us about the Bureau of Land Management and its role and how it's trying to preserve the land for future generations. And some of the conflicts that the Bureau of Land Management runs across is, what do you do with the site if it has archaeological importance? And we'll kind of get into that a little bit. All right, as I mentioned, the construction worker had found this bone. They prematurely radiocarbon dated this bone to be about 26,000 years old. And the reason, you might ask, why might this bone end up in a site like this in the San Luis Valley of all places? And it wasn't too much surprise that it was existed here, because the bone was residing in a geological formation called an alluvial fan. And what an alluvial fan is, it's an area of like degradation from a higher elevation to a lower elevation, so it kind of slopes down. And a high-powered stream will carry some sediments, and in this case, like animal remnants, down the slope side and kind of disperse across the valley floor and kind of fan out and shape. Hence the name alluvial fan. So here's a picture of an alluvial fan. It's not, you can't see it too well, but here's kind of like the mountain range side here, and it kind of just slopes down here all the way to this excavation site where they had found mammoth bone. And it's actually a convergence of several alluvial fans, so it's, they all kind of congregated and ended up here. So here's a picture of us kind of looking at the site of what it looks like now. They removed a lot of the animal remains, and this little like kind of area here is like the presence of gully fill, and that's just kind of where an ancient stream resided a long time ago. And then we had also got a chance to talk to an archaeologist that was working on the site, who was trying to find the presence of humans. And she said currently they haven't found any tools or any weapons of that sort to indicate human presence at the site. She said a reason for this could have been that tools are really valuable to these prehistoric peoples, and they would just carry them for great distances, because as you imagine, you'd need them to survive. One thing that was interesting about this site was they may have found indications on the mammoth bone that that humans may have flaked or caused spiral fracture to these bones, much of which Vance will be getting into later in his talk. But this is significant because if they had found a human interaction with these bones, or humans that had caused damage to these mammoths, that would push the date of human existence in the New World back even further to the time period of pre-Clovis occupation. And whenever we think of the term pre-Clovis occupation, we think of a time when civilization lived prior to 10,000 years ago. And another thing to note about this site was that they found other species because of this geological formation that it was sitting in. And they had found 2 species of snail, an American camel a ground squirrel, a rodent of some sort, a rabbit. And the camelos they had found here is similar to what you find in northern Africa today. And one of the most interesting finds is the snail shells that they had found there, because snail shells are very climate specific and they're very sensitive to climate change. So this would be indicative of a lot of moisture at the time, where there'd be plentiful amounts of water, and probably a lot of like tall grasslands. And as you'd imagine, the Columbia mammoth species, they consume hundreds of pounds of grass a day. They would need lots of vegetation to survive. And one thing that they found at the site was a tooth of a mammoth, or a tusk, I'm not really sure. And they were able to determine that it was a juvenile mammoth, so it died when it was young. And they estimated that it grew to be, or that it would be around 7 feet tall. And its adult counterparts would probably be about 13 feet tall and weigh about 10 tons. So these large creatures ate tall grasses and were hunted by close people we have found. And the next part of our talk, I'm going to turn you over to my brother, and he will be talking to you about the Florissant fossil beds. Thank you. Alrighty. So Florissant, Colorado is in central Colorado. It's very close to Colorado Springs. If you get a chance to visit it, I really suggest it. They're building a new visitor center, and it's going to be pretty awesome. This site is very. It's one of the richest fossil deposits in the world, and it's not only home to the carbon impressions of fossils, but it's also home to petrified redwood trees. And starting in the early 1920s, settlers are coming over, setting up these tourist sites, and people were coming from all over, and they were pretty much felt free to take fossils with them, and even pieces of petrified wood. And it wasn't even until 1969 that it became a national monument. So this kind of helps protect these fossils in the area, and scientists are able to come in and study these fossils and just compare them to organisms that we have today. It was also believed to have, we had three Indian tribes here, the Paleo Indians, the Utes, and the Apache. And just a good indication of this are the culturally modified trees in the area, or CMTs, and these are, you can tell these from a regular tree just because they have scarring or bent structure, or even like messages cut into them. They would just use them for medicine and praying. So you might ask, how did these trees become fossilized? So back in the Eocene era, millions of years ago, massive volcanic eruptions would deposit volcanic ash on the valley floor, and this volcanic ash, when it would surround these trees, the silicate within the volcanic ash would replace the organic material within the tree cells, thus preserving the tree cells and leaving the tree rings intact. And I don't know this on a chemical level, but that's just a basic outline. So as you may know or may not know, tree rings are a good indication of what the climate was back in the day. So they're able to see, like, the larger rings will indicate better growing season. And just naturally, when the stumps became petrified, the rest of the tree would rot away, and just leaving these stumps in the ground. To give you a picture in your mind of what these trees look like, in circumference, they're around 41 feet in circumference, and they would have stood 200 feet high. And in this picture here, you'll see 3 stumps coming out of the ground, and this is a trait that redwoods have. So when a redwood feels threatened of its life, like it's going to die or just a bad season, it'll sprout up 3 seedlings, and they'll grow in this formation, just 3 coming out of the ground. So when the settlers came over, like I said earlier, they were taking many pieces of these trees, and they would use dynamite to extract it. That's why this one's all flat. Now at the park, they have battens around them to just keep them from further weathering. A lake bed also formed in the valley, so this is where we're going to get all the organisms from, all the carbon footprints. So when organisms would die in the Eocene era, they would settle to the bottom of this lake floor, and this lake floor is filled with fine-grained sediments, and over time this fine-grained sediment would compact and become shell, and the intricate details of the organisms would be preserved. We were able to study them today. In the park, they've observed 1,700 different species of organisms, and just by looking at these organisms and even the trees, we were able to determine just like a very different landscape than it is today. Just much more moist, lush environment, grasses, more access to water. The organisms back then would have been much larger. Here's some of the shell that they would have been found in. So another interesting thing that we found at the site was the park ranger had actually told us they found a mammoth tooth at the site, and it was just kind of coincident, and he went with the whole theme of our trip. So they were able to pre-carbon date this tooth to be around 50,000 years old, so nowhere near from the Eocene era. But one interesting find was the actual pollen on the tooth, because the pollen is a species of palms, and just because by looking at the palms you can tell what the climate was like, just because of what they had to grow in and what environment they lived in. So the next presenter will be Vance Barksdale, and he'll be presenting the Denver Museum of Science.
Thank you. Well, like I said, I'm presenting on the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and super cool for me because this is absolutely my favorite place in Colorado. The first time I went there, I spent a good 2 hours meandering through the mineral section at the museum. Let's see if I can. And we had a great opportunity while we were over there. We met Dr. Steve Poling, who is a curator of archaeology over at the museum. And we got to go and look at a lot of stuff that you normally wouldn't get to look at. Right there's just one drawer and all those Clovis arrowheads that had been collected from all over North America. And so the really cool thing about being able to go back to those storage areas is at any one time there is a small portion of their specimens actually out on display. And so back to the storage areas, there's just shelves upon shelves of different stuff to look at. And even just those arrowheads, there's so many of those arrowheads. And just pretty cool. And actually getting to see the real bones, because they're right there, they're making, I don't know what you'd call it, kind of replicas of the bones. But you actually get to see the original bones in section. So it's just a pretty cool experience. And what Steve Poling, he is a doctor of archaeology, and he specializes in early people of North America. In fact, I think it's pretty cool. I was watching one of his interviews, and he was talking about how his goal is to look into the early peopling of North America. I've been dying to use the word peopling ever since I've heard him say it. Just right there, we got to see some replicas of some of the tools the early Clovis people would have been using, arrowheads and stone tools. This right here is to bend, I believe, javelins to give it the curve for throwing. And when you think of Clovis people, normally maybe 13 to 15,000 years ago is the old thought of when Clovis people started coming to North America. Right here is a mammoth. I'm not sure if this was a replica or not, but either way, whether it's a replica or not, it's supposed to be a mammoth long bone. And this fracture right here is spiral fracturing, which occurs in the compact bone. Well, okay, when I was a kid, I don't know if this is just my family, it's from my mom's side of the family, but when we get chicken bone from rotisserie chickens, like chew on the ends, and the ends, you just bite them right off. You try to get that bristle off, and the whole chunk comes off. You like chew on it, spit it out. But then the center is a lot harder, and we get to the marrow. So you'd actually like really crunch that bone to get into the marrow. So that center part, that's the compact bone, kind of the shaft, and then that outside is the spongy bone. It's a lot softer and a lot easier to chew off. So spiral fractures. They're unique and identifiable. You're not going to find a long bone and see that. And when you see that spiral fracture, there's no doubt that this is a spiral fracture. It looks different from just stomping on it or whatnot or crushing. And it's usually produced by a force that's perpendicular onto usually around the center of the long bone. And by long bones, I'm talking about, for the examples in here, it's like your humerus, your femur. There are a lot more long bones, but when I'll be talking about specific examples, it'll be with your humerus and your femur. And so he's done some research. So one of his experiments was to take the long bones from cows and feed them to hyenas and lions and just see are they able to produce these spiral fractures. And what his observations were is that they chew on the ends, kind of like when I was a kid, get at that spongy bone, but they were not breaking into that shaft, they're not breaking the compact bone. And he also did observations on trampling, because his claim is that spiral fractures are only produced by humans using a stone tool, having an impact towards the center of the bone, center of the compact bone. He needs to try to give evidence for why you're not going to produce this in other manners. And so he did some trampling studies and found that it did not produce the same type of spiral fracture, and also that in general your smaller bones, more fragile bones like your ribs and your vertebrae, those are going to get damaged first and break apart before you start doing damage to your lung bone, which is going to be a little important when we start talking about a specific dig site he's gone to. And so now what he did do, actually we can go back real quick. Right there is a big stone thingamabobber that he attached to a big stick, got it all put on there. And he used elephant long bones. And now he didn't go hunting elephants. He was on one of his trips. He ran across an already dead elephant and got one of the long bones, propped it up on a rock, made a stone tool, which was a pretty big, hefty rock, and got it, broke it, and then it produced spiral fractures. So that was kind of his evidence that spiral fractures you are able to recreate spiral fractures using stone tools, and also eliminating some of these other possibilities of spiral fractures. And I'm sorry, I just kind of skipped on a little part about the large predators. So we're talking about hyenas and lions compared to cow bones. Well, in the mammoths that we're talking about are from the Pleistocene epoch, and so the predators at that time were significantly larger compared to our hyenas. But at the same time, your mammoths are also significantly larger than a cow, so he just believes that even though our large predators of today can't break a cow, the large predators of then would not be able to break into the mammoth shaft. And so kind of the take-home message, according to his research, is spiral fractures do not occur naturally. They're caused by humans with usually a stone tool. So, what does this all mean? Well, when you find some of his dig sites, he found spiral fractures on bones that are 20,000 years old and older. This whole idea that Clovis, they're the first people coming to America 13,000, 15,000 years ago, and we're finding evidence of them being around even before that, significantly before that. Some of his a little more controversial work is actually getting a little farther towards 30,000 years. We'll even stick with some of these closer to 20,000 years ago. So that's our inference. Humans migrated to America earlier than originally believed. Because anytime you're finding the spiral fractures, it's indicating that humans were present, they used their stone tools, they broke them. They caused the spiral fractures. This gets into this idea of pre-Clovis people. So now there's some problems with some, I guess, opposition to his research is people ask, where are the stone tools? They go to this dig site, they find that he has a mammoth with 26,000 years old, has spiral fractures, and no stone tools. So, the reason he believes is in this area that it's an alluvial fan. There's some sediment, not a whole lot of big rocks going around. If you do not have large stones around to use as a resource, then it is a very important commodity. You're going to carry it with you. You're not going to, get your stone, break it, leave it at the site. You had to carry this over here in the first place. You're going to continue carrying that stone. That's why I believe these stone tools are not found at the sites. So I guess, why mammoth bones? Well, for me, this was super cool. When I got to the Denver Museum, not only was it the Denver Museum, but I knew instantly when I heard this guy talking about his research that this is what I was going to present about at this Port Scholar talk. Because I too do some research here at the college through the Porter Scholarship. It's an independent project I'll be talking about next semester. And so I'm attracted to research, but not just that. He is making a really significant impact on the scientific community. I mean, for years and years, they're talking, people came to North America 15,000 years ago, and that's this belief that's been going around, and all of a sudden that's getting pushed way back. That's just monumental in my mind, and I want to be doing medical research when I graduate, and it's just, I hope I'll be able to make a significant impact in medical research like this guy does in his field of archaeology. And Tavia is up next talking about geologic structures.
All right, so a big part of this trip, what we did is we spent a lot of time with Dr. Beaton driving around seeing stuff that he worked on during his master's degree around Greeley, up in northern Colorado up there. You can see over by Fort Collins. So one of the things we saw was the Devil's Backbone. And this is a geologic formation. It's caused by differential erosion. So what happened is there's the uplift of the modern Rocky Mountains. So what this does is it tilts all the beds that are originally horizontal up. So what's going to happen is there's going to be softer rock on the sides and harder rock in the middle. So the softer rock is going to get eroded away on these sides, leaving a ridge of harder rock, and that's called a hogback. So what's exposed is the Dakota Sandstone Formation. All right, so that's pretty cool. The reason this is cool, it's also like everywhere you're walking in this area, you can look around and just even on the trail, all of the beds are tilted at almost 90 degrees, so just everywhere, and that's from the uplift of the Rocky Mountains. And then it's part of a syncline-anticline formation, and you can kind of see that going all the way until we kept driving until Big Thompson Canyon. And Big Thompson Canyon was cool because there's the Big Thompson flood that happened in 1976, and it claimed the lives of almost 150 people. So really big flood. The Big Thompson flood happened. It was a flash flood that started at the top of the canyon. And it was, there was 12 inches of rain at the top of the canyon in under 4 hours. And that's almost 3/4 of the annual rainfall for this entire area for the year. So 3/4 of that in one storm event. So this is just what I got from a little book about natural disasters that talked about this one. But it said around 9 p.m., water more than 20 feet high raced down the canyon at about 14 miles an hour. So it destroyed 400 cars, 418 houses, like 50 businesses, and basically destroyed this entire road. And it's the largest flood they ever had seen in the 112-year record that was available. And they said the discharge was 1,000 cubic meters per second. So it's really, really crazy flood. So what happened is everyone tried to go down the canyon and outrace the flood instead of going to higher ground. You can't outrace the flood, so that's why everything was basically destroyed. And then driving through the canyon, we were starting to see like houses on the sides over there. And it's a really pretty house and all, but the thing with floods is if there's a flood that happens like that, there is a chance that that'll happen again. So at some point in life, there's going to be a flood this large in this canyon again. So that's the Big Thompson flood. We also went to Rocky Mountain National Park, which was awesome. Rocky Mountain National Park, so cool. And I'm a geology major, so I was just kind of going crazy when I was there. So the first thing we saw there was the Long Lake flood and the Long Lake debris fan. And the reason that that's cool is a moraine was damming up a lake. So we'll talk about moraines in a little bit, but what happened is it failed, so it sent a giant flood event just downstream. So what happened is, with the flood event, there's a lot of high energy at the top, and as it goes down this hillside, it's going to lose energy. So as things lose energy, it's not going to be able to carry as big of rocks and as big of boulders. So there's a lot of bigger rocks at the top, a lot of smaller rocks getting deposited at the bottom. There's a picture of it, so there's bigger boulders up here, and it just spread all over this road. And it looks like an alluvial fan. It has the same principles as an alluvial fan, so as energy decreases, it's going to start dropping particles, but it's actually all created from one flood event. And then the biggest part about Rocky Mountain National Park is all of the glacial landforms that you see there. You see Dr. Bean over here arm waving at us, talking about probably about the Hanging Valley. So a Hanging Valley is this formation right here was formed. There used to be a glacier sitting right in there. And the way a glacier works is it's going to move in. What it's going to do is it's basically just going to carve out this landscape. So these are both hanging valleys that were carved out by glaciers. Here's a little diagram. This would be where the glacier is, and glaciers make a lot of cool landforms. One of the ones we saw the most was moraines. So moraines are what happens is a glacier is going to be moving, and it's going to push up sediment on the sides of it. So these are medial moraines, so the moraines that are happening when two glaciers are moving forward, so those are going to be in the center. We also have terminal moraines down here, which is going to be the furthest extent that a glacier is pushed forward. So moraines everywhere in that park. I think if you looked in any direction, you were going to see one. But there's also cirques. Cirques, it's a little amphitheater-shaped depression, and what that would be is there would be a glacier in that basically just carved out a bowl in this side of a mountain. Arêtes are around cirques. There's a little diagram of one. It's just the edge peak, so glaciers are going to carve out the sides, going to leave a nice edge for you. And then U-shaped valleys is what I was talking about. They're just, if you guys ever see pictures of fjords, so fjords are actually hanging valleys that have just had the sea level rise and water come into them. What are other ones we saw? The glacial processes we saw that were causing these. So one of them is basal surge. So it just means that there's a glacier. Glaciers are really heavy, so it's going to cause the ice on the bottom to kind of melt. So it's kind of a plastic layer movement. So finally, what happens is the glacier just surges forward from gravity. So basal surge, the plastic movement of the glacier. That's why glaciers move forward, is because there's going to be melting on the bottom from just gravity and pressure. Accumulation and ablation, those are two big things with glaciers. Accumulation is when a glacier moves forward. So a moraine is going to get pushed forward when a glacier is accumulating, so everything goes forward. And then ablation is when a glacier is losing mass, so it's when things are melting away. So that's what's happening to all our glaciers right now. More glacial landforms, scour marks. These are from when a glacier is moving, it's going to pick up pieces of rock, and it's going to be scraping across the bedrock. So the pieces of rock that have been picked up in these glaciers are going to form these scour marks. So if you look around at the bedrock, you can see at the park, you can just see these little scrapes, and they kind of show you the movement of a glacier. There's also paternoster lakes. This is a little picture of paternoster lakes. But the way those are is when a glacier is moving back, there's going to be a terminal moraine, and when it moves back, some water is going to fill that in, and there's going to be a tiny little stream that moves. So it's going to be a stream, and you're going to get just as the glacier recedes, you're going to get tons of tiny little lakes until you finally get to the end lake, which would be a tarn. So we actually hiked up to a tarn. I think there's a picture of it later in this slideshow, but they're basically all landforms that just show the movements of glaciers. There are also kettle lakes. And kettle lakes are formed when a glacier is receding. Sometimes there's going to be a piece of that glacier that gets left behind. So what happens is there's a piece of glacier still there. You're going to get sediment that fills in around that piece. And then when it melts, you're going to get a lake. So down in this diagram, little kettle lakes, those would have been formed by glaciers receding and pieces being left behind. Exfoliation domes were another thing we saw there. Exfoliation dome is, it's going to be, there's a batholith under the surface, and a batholith is just an igneous intrusion of rock. So it's just magma that shot up, was under the surface. And when the batholith was exposed, what happens is the batholith is used to being under extreme pressure under the earth. So when it's at the surface, it doesn't have that pressure holding it together. So it's going to sort of peel away. That's why it has this shape. It's just lifting off pressure, and that's why it's eroding in that pattern. We hiked the Emerald Lake Trail, so that's the one we went up to. Nice Google Maps picture of it. Dream Lake was one of the lower lakes. As I said, those happen when a glacier ablates, those are exposed. The cool thing with the lakes, a little biology that I'm not too good on, but there's eutrophic and oligotrophic lakes. Eutrophic, as far as I understand, they have more life in them because they're a little older, so they have a little more chance to form. And then Emerald Lake, this is the one we hiked up to. There was a little baby glacier they were saying was up there, held at a glacier. But, so this is the last to be exposed from the extent of the glacier, so it's going to be more oligotrophic, so it's not going to have as much life in it. So when you look down in these lakes, it's super crystal clear. There's not a whole, like, I think we saw like 2 fish in like any of the lakes. So these are really young lakes, not a whole lot of life in them. And then we're going to pass it on to Nikki.
Okay, so this is the Mountain Research Station. This is also still part of, I guess, the Rocky Mountain National Park, a little bit. And so it's located at Newmont Ridge, west of Boulder, Colorado. It's an interdisciplinary research and educational facility that generally provides support and information for the study of mountain ecosystems. So you can see it on the map over. Is this the pointer? Yes. Yeah, so you can see that right. That's kind of like where we were. So it started out mainly as a camp for different field studies such as geology and biology. It first was an Institute of Arctic and Alpine Ecology in 1951 due to some really successful ecology courses conducted by Dr. John Marr. He had also pushed for establishing a winter research lab of mountain plant ecology, which led to the setup of environmental analysis stations in various ecological zones such as lower montane, upper montane, subalpine forest, and alpine tundra. Each zone had different collection stations that measured climate variation on various slopes. And the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, initiated a research partnership with the Mountain Research Station in 1968, which allowed NOAA to establish a carbon dioxide collection station and later a methane collection station as well. So here's some pictures of the atmospheric instrumentation that's actually still up there, and it's actually really very old. And we got to get really good close-up pictures and stuff of this. So this one right here is actually a precipitation gauge. It's a couple of buckets, and one bucket is covered. And once it feels the water droplets from rain come in, it actually rotates over and starts collecting in one bucket so that it knows for that rainfall how much precipitation there was. There's also groundwater sampling, snow and glacial sampling, climate stations, such as the C1 station, that would register and record trace elements in the air, such as carbon dioxide and different methanogens and stuff like that. And let's see. Yeah, because much of the equipment was used from the 1950s, they haven't really upgraded it because they were worried about, affecting the consistency of measurements and messing up that. One of the cool things we got to see along the hike up to the Tundra Lab that we'll get to in a couple of slides is this tree sprout study. And so this experiment is studying different climate effects on tree growth. There are like 40 sites that study different growth spruce saplings under varying conditions such as different altitudes, watering amounts, nutritions, and temperatures. The study is to see how climate warming and increased precipitation can alter tree growth patterns and how the ecosystem would shift to allow those tree growth patterns to continue. So there's us at the Tundra Lab. And so the Tundra Lab, which is one of the environmental analysis stations, is a climate data collecting station, and it's one of the 4 remaining stations that still exist. It was built in 1989 in order to accommodate for increasing research needs on Newmont Ridge. So this lab was built at an altitude of 11,625 feet. So if you don't realize this, Alamosa is at 76,000 feet, so it's quite a height. 7,600, yeah, so it's quite a height. And this is extremely physically challenging, even hazardous to reach this station, especially because winds can get way over 120 miles per hour. And so then our very last stop was the National Center for Atmospheric Research, the MESA laboratory. And before we even got into the NCAR, we were actually given a tour around, and you can actually see, so here's NCAR right here. You can actually see on this northern face of this mesa, there's all this foliage right here. That's because it's receiving less direct sunlight, and it allows for the water retention to be higher, so it allows for more growth. You can see, so then the microclimate on the other side is a lot more arid, because it doesn't have that same water retention. And so you can just see a small microclimate change right in front of the NCAR station. Okay, so this is the supercomputer, and I'm not a computer person, so I'm not talking about this. This is one of the Cisneros brothers.
Alrighty, I wish we had a lot of time to kind of go over this, and I wish I would research this a little bit more, but like, this is one of the coolest parts of the trip I really enjoyed. NCAR had this really extensive computer network that cost millions of dollars to put together, and they called this complex the Bluefire supercomputer. And the thing with the Bluefire supercomputer is it's allowed a lot of researchers and a lot of statistical analysis and a lot of climatologists to like congregate together and make a lot of models to replicate how our climate change has been is going to affect the future generations. And with the thing with these supercomputers is they have tons and tons of processing power. A lot of like the processors that we have in our computers we can think of as being like between 1 or 2 gigs of RAM, and they just stack tons of those on top of each other. And this Bluefire supercomputer is capable of performing about 30 million computations per second, which sounds really amazing until you think about a new project we have going on called Yellowstone supercomputer. And the Yellowstone supercomputer, sorry, I'm sounding good here, is a project going on in Wyoming where they're going to build a larger network and input more processing power into these computers, and it will have the capability of performing about 40 quadrillion computations per second. And one thing that's kind of amazing to know about this is they have put some bids in and like saying, oh, what are we going to do with this software? What are we going to do with this capability? And they already withdrew the capacity of the new one that they're planning to build. So, I mean, as you can see, there's a demand for these really high-tech computers and technology to be in place for studying climate change. I don't know how much time we have left. It took about 5 minutes or 6 minutes. But we would like to just thank Mr. and Mrs. Porter for the Porter Scholarship, and also just thank you for all you guys to come. And also for a lot of the people that we have met on our trip. We had a lot of individuals that were really gracious to us to meet us on and give us time to like explain what type of research they're doing. And for example, Steve Holland, he took us to see all the back rooms of the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And it's just really cool to get like a backstage tour of that. But I don't know if we'd like to all come down here and we could answer questions if you guys have any. Or